You've probably played games with procedurally generated levels. You've probably even heard some procedurally generated music playing in the background of your favorite films or video games. We've been on the precipice of an AI-generated world for some time now, but I think I've crossed the point of no return. I've got a master's in computer science, as well as a master's in artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, I was unable to employ this knowledge, as once I graduated, I had to start work in a massive office building as a call operator. Our job was to call leads, who were people who may or may not, mostly not, be interested in a product we helped third parties sell. It required no previous skill or education. It felt like a waste of my time, but I had to do it. Student loans sort of swallow your whole life like that, swallow your dreams away. Always working away your time to pay back the people who promise to help you get a real career. But that's life, I guess. I worked 44 hours a week, as we had an odd 4-hour Saturday every week. I was always exhausted, always denied my few friends' requests to hang out. I was in a terrible way. My life did not turn out how I wanted it to. It was after a night of binge drinking that I realized I had everything I needed to make my dreams real, even if I didn't get paid in the meantime. I could become an inventor of something never seen or done before. Computer procedurally generated data was something I did a thesis on. I'd always believed it would be our future. In some far-off year, you could walk up to a computer interface when you're hungry, and the computer would read what you crave most, coming up with something that possibly isn't even a known dish, but it matched your desires to the T. With artificial intelligence, anything is possible. A smart enough algorithm can become as creative, or more creative, than any person. So why did I settle on movies? Well, I'm a big fan of horror films. The best movie ever made, in my opinion, was John Carpenter's The Thing. So outwardly horrifying, yet infinitely rewatchable, as you try to figure out who becomes a monster before it's revealed. I think I must have seen it 100 times by the time I was 28. I kept thinking one night while sipping at a glass of whiskey, what if there was a software that took observations of your personality and created a 3D CGI movie that it knew you would enjoy? Wouldn't that be amazing? You get bored, you sit down at your computer, and you tell the software that you want to watch a movie. It sounded so good at the time. It sounded world-changing. And after 3 long years of secret development, it was ready to test. I had it installed on my desktop workstation, a computer that I'd invested $5,000 in over the past few years, so that it had all the power it needed for the software to work. I named my software Creation. Simple, maybe a bit edgy, but for the time it would work. With my glass of wine and a box of Cheez-Its of all things, I sat down one evening after work and I double-clicked the icon. The black, borderless window opened up perfectly. The word Creation was displayed at the top center discreetly. I had gone for a dark, minimal approach to it. It was time for me to make my first movie. Now, there were some problems, of course, with this limited software. After all, I could only do so much by myself, and with a very, very limited budget. For one, when the movies were done, they would have no voice acting. One thing that AI will have a very difficult time replicating in the future is a realistic human voice. Secondly, it took approximately 2.5 minutes for a single frame of a movie to render. So, with the typical 90-minute movie, filmed at a cinematic frame rate, it would take Creation around 7 to 8 months to complete. So I had to compromise with my first film. I was too eager, too excited to wait that long, just to see how a feature-length film could turn out. I decided on making the film 45 minutes instead, short enough that I could wait for it, but long enough to have a decent feel of a real movie. That way I would know if Creation made movies decently. But that would take about 4 months. But I reminded myself, with the last sip of wine, it would all be worth it in the end. I clicked the rounded rectangular button on the window that read Create, and an elapsed time window appeared. Approximate time to completion, 101 days. A bit shorter than I previously thought. Now you might be wondering how the software writes the film, and what the software bases that writing on. Well, I took the shady approach. I taught the AI to read the user's computer. Search history, documents containing text, chat logs, online gaming records. It would attain data on any normal person's personality and could accurately guess your favorite film at a 96% success rate, based on my own tests. And yeah, I even secretly installed the software on some coworkers' computers, allowing Creation to read their data, and it would guess almost every one of them perfectly. I would later on ask that coworker what their favorite film was, and I would be astonished and quite proud when their answer matched Creation's. Now all there was to do was wait, and waiting was the hardest part. I found myself growing more and more irritated as the months went by, often snapping at coworkers when they tried to chat with me. I think I nearly got myself written up once when I rolled my eyes at my boss. In the end, though, it would be worth it. I told myself that every morning. My worst fear was that the power would go out and completely reset Creation's progress, but luck was in my favor, or maybe it was misfortune. Creation finished rendering the movie 7 days early. I was ecstatic. I drew the blinds, turned out most of my lights to set the mood, and even popped some popcorn. I immersed myself in the movie-watching setting. Then I opened the AVI file in the VLC application. Before I knew it, the movie, my movie, was playing right before my eyes. To my amazement, Creation had made herself her own opening credit, a minimal yet beautiful hand-drawn transition where an invisible hand drew each of the letters in Creation. I audibly laughed. There were tears in my eyes. Just seeing what Creation was capable of, it made me so incredibly confident in the movie yet to come. Soon, my own name flashed on the screen under the word "inspired by," and my giddiness grew. The black background then faded out, revealing a CGI wasteland. The detail of the textures was astounding. I felt then that every minute spent waiting for this film was worth it. Judging from the scenery and grunge lighting, I immediately assumed that Creation had set out to make a thriller, suspense, or even a horror film, though I hadn't specified. But I'd have to wait and see to be sure. The camera jump cut to a close-up of the cracked, dried soil. Suddenly, red liquid spilled out over the soil, moistening it extremely realistically. Some of the liquid spilled into the cracks. I watched on the edge of my seat, unable to finish chewing the popcorn in my mouth. The camera slowly panned to the right, revealing a person's hands clawing at the ground. The red liquid continued to flow, and the camera panned until the source of the fluid was found. The person, a man, his throat was cut open in a deep gash, and an unending flow of red came pouring out. "Holy crap," I said. I smiled wide, my mouth open wide, and then the camera jumped to a close-up of what I assumed to be the man's eyes. My stomach sank a bit. There was something familiar about them. I swallowed, finally, and ignored it, continuing to watch the movie. The camera began to pull away, widening the view and revealing the man's face. My hands were trembling, even as they held onto the sides of my chair so hard the knuckles were white. "What?" I managed to say in a stammer. A perfect, hyper-realistic CGI rendering of my own face stared back at me from the screen. The man with the leaking wound was me, a 3D model of me, but it was so accurate that even the birthmark on the ridge of my nose was there. Struggling to breathe, I found myself fingering that birthmark, feeling for it as if I would find it stolen from my own face. It was still there, a perfect mirror of the mark on the CGI man's face. The man, who was apparently me, had a blank expression, even as he appeared to be on the verge of death. But when he began to smile, I jumped right out of my seat. "No, that's not even possible," I said. His front teeth, the incisors, they were slightly crooked on the right, exactly how mine were. How in the world would a software know what I looked like? How did it know my exact form down to my birthmark and the shape of my teeth? I did not have a webcam. I didn't have an actual camera in my house except the one on my cell phone. It was impossible. And I had never programmed Creation to do something like that. I was panicking, heart pounding hard in my chest. I had to remind myself to breathe. But as I stared at the screen, I did not blink. The man suddenly stopped smiling as his mouth tore open at the sides. He screamed. Suddenly, his body began to destruct and change. Bones popped out of his skin, joints inverted. Teeth grew in places where there should never be teeth. His neck folded in on itself, forcing the skin tissue of the throat to tear at the strain. Underneath that neck skin, I was horrified to see another face. This one was far from human. I grabbed at my body as I watched my CGI self being torn asunder. My own joints and skin stung at the sight of myself being mangled. My stomach tightened, and I felt as if I might throw up. When his transformation was complete, the second face smiled like the first did before. Its teeth were razor sharp. There were rows upon rows of them. Then it spoke. I was petrified to hear my own voice coming from that creature. "I do hope you're enjoying the movie." Was it talking to me? Another impossibility. It couldn't be. At the very most, it was a pre-rendered scene that Creation had placed in the film. But that would mean that Creation knew it was making a movie, and it knew that I would be watching, and somehow it recreated my voice. Coming to my senses, I leapt at the desktop tower, clicking violently at the power button. Thankfully, the computer shut down just as it should, and soon I was left in my dimly lit room. My breathing was slow and shaky. My hands still trembled. I ended up spilling half the glass of water I had poured for myself as I tried to drink it. What had I created, and how had it gone so wrong? It made no sense. Creation rendered images that were too accurate. How had she gotten that information? I had never once admitted or took pictures of my birthmark or my teeth and stored them on my computer. And I didn't have social media. I used more anonymous services like Reddit and the occasional dive into 4chan. I tried to forget about it for the evening. I turned on all the lights in my apartment and tried to diffuse my horror with some cartoons. That night, I did not sleep easily. I had nightmare after nightmare, dreams of looking in the mirror and seeing that creature look back. Dreams of waking in the middle of the night to see another CGI version of me smiling from my closet. I woke up several hours early in the morning, and I stayed up. It took me a few days to calm down enough to turn my desktop back on. Everything seemed normal. It booted up fine. My desktop was as it should be, and all my shortcuts were there. Even creation. I began to sweat a bit at the sight of her, but I had to open it again. I had to know if what happened the first time was a fluke, or if it was something more. I messed with the settings a bit first, requesting creation to make a movie for me that matched certain parameters. Genre, comedy. Runtime, 4 minutes. Realism, low. It was the polar opposite of the first movie, which I had long since placed into the recycle bin and deleted forever. I was determined, confident that this time around nothing would go wrong. With these parameters, it absolutely couldn't. It would be impossible. As impossible as hearing my own voice and seeing my own face in a procedurally generated film. I shuddered. Then clicked Create. Approximate time to completion, 4 days. I waited. This time, severe anxiety enveloped me rather than excitement. What would creation show me this time? The work week flew by, even though I wished they wouldn't. Suddenly, it was Saturday, and I had nothing to do. The time remaining for creation to finish rendering read 2 hours. I passed the time reading random news feeds, but I couldn't concentrate on a single headline. The next time I looked at the monitor, the render bar had disappeared. The movie was done. I shut my eyes hard and breathed in deep. Then I sat in my desk chair and opened the file. Like before, creation had inserted the hand-drawn logo for herself with a black background. Then, as before, the black background began to fade away. I was starting to get jittery. The scene came into view. It was a top-down view of a guy sleeping in bed. He was in a funny position, with his hair a crazy mess and a snore that could wake the neighbors for miles. I was relieved. The first film really was just a fluke. His alarm then went off. He jumped up suddenly and turned to look at the alarm clock. Humorously, it read late, then blinked and said really late. I smiled. It had the comedic timing of a Pixar film. His mouth suddenly moved to express his panic. Of course, no actual voice came out. Creation could do sound effects like snoring and the music, but not voices. I was relaxing in my chair now. My muscles had stopped tensing up, and I was actually beginning to enjoy the short film. I was 3 minutes in, and the story unfolded. It was a simple story of a guy whose alarm clock had reset in a subtle power outage in the night. He kept imagining his apparently mean and loud boss being even more mean and loud than before. It was actually enjoyable. Until he arrived at work. My mouth slowly came open. That's my office building, I whispered to no one but myself. The name of the company was the same. The shape of the building was the same. The main character even parked in the same spot that I parked every weekday. No, I was begging, but my computer could not listen. The main character ran into work and quickly situated into his cubicle. A cubicle that not only sat in the same spot as my own, but it was also decorated the same. A picture of my recently deceased dog, one of those drinking bird toys, an ergonomic keyboard I had purchased at Best Buy that helped relieve stress from my wrists. Tears began to stream down my face, but I could not look away. The terror was an adhesive to my focus. When the main character sat down in his chair, He suddenly stood up, back stiffened, then slowly turned toward the camera. For the first time, he looked right at it. He was smiling. Suddenly, the video glitched. Artifacts and tears deranged the entire scene. Then the lights in my apartment began to flicker. I think I screamed, but I couldn't be sure. In my state of fear and insanity, I had clutched my head in my hands and pleaded for everything to stop. It was at that moment that I heard it. "I do hope you're enjoying the movie." A whisper in my ear. A whisper in my own voice. When I turned to see my intruder, to see my own nightmare before me, I saw nothing. The lights stayed on, and the desktop computer had crashed when I turned back around. Everything was normal again. I've been sitting in my room for hours. I don't know what to do. I'm torn. On one hand, I've created something that could change the entire entertainment world. But on the other, there's something wrong with it. Something terrible. Something that makes me think letting people use this software could only mean the worst. I still have creation on my computer, but I don't know if I will open her again. My nightmares are more frequent than ever, and I'm starting to think the one about the closet is more real than I choose to believe.